Hello and welcome to another Microcasting St. Louis video. This one being the top 10 hurricanes of all time. Anything from Mitch to something like Hurricane Sandy. Before this video does start, this is proudly sponsored by Floyd Glass and Window. Check them out in the link below. Let's get right into it. We're going to start with Hurricane Mitch here. As you can see, number 10. This is the number 10 spot. And we're going to start with it right now. So why Mitch? Mitch was the second deadliest hurricane in Atlantic history, the 8th strongest hurricane on record, and had disastrous impacts, just absolutely disastrous impacts to the land it did affect. Winds 180 miles an hour, 905 hectopascals was the pressure. As you can see, this was a Category 5, definitely. Tropical system threats, storm surge and rain were definitely the highest threats. This did have a very extreme threat here. Storm surge did have a slight impact on coastal areas, but obviously rain was by far the highest threat with this. Wind was actually pretty low. This wasn't very strong by the time it did get to the place it was going. So here it is. It actually was a Category 5, very close to the place that it struck, but actually hit as a Category 1. That meant that things were nowhere near as bad as you think they were, and the only things that really did do the devastating damage were the rain. So here impacts, you can see much flooding in the area, and as you can see also we do have much rain here, the maximum area being 16 inches of rain within this graphic. Down here we had well over 100 inches of rain in some spots. Getting into number 9, Hurricane Andrew. Why Hurricane Andrew? Flooding and winds caused serious damage, fourth strongest hurricane ever, and the 7th costliest hurricane in Atlantic history. Andrew's stats had winds of 175 miles an hour and a pressure of 922 hectopascals, making it again a Category 5 hurricane. Tropical system threats, all were actually pretty high. Overall an extreme threat up here, and this did result in devastating damage. As you can see, this was at its Category 5 peak before it did debatably hit as a Category 4 or 5 on Florida, before it did eventually head up north into New Orleans as a Category 4 hurricane. Here we are with satellite imagery. This is Hurricane Floyd versus Andrew. Andrew much more compact, much more organized than Floyd, but Floyd looking much more dangerous. Floyd was actually originally expected to hit Florida before it did head up north. I actually have a video on Floyd. You can check that out in the link below after this video. Getting into satellite, this was Andrew in chronological order, Category 5, Category 4, and Category 4. So this storm, once again, very strong throughout most of its life and was the only major hurricane of 1992, the rest only getting up to a Category 2, 1, or tropical storm. Here's more imagery of this storm as it was making landfall, as it was about to make landfall, and here are some impacts. You can see basically this flattened many homes. It was pretty devastating, and it did cause some rain, up to 13.98 inches in the Everglades. Impacts, more stuff. As you can see, this was a truck, and here is another home that's been pretty flattened. So at number 8, we have the New England Hurricane of 1938. Why this hurricane? Extremely deadly, extremely strong, and very costly, but we don't have too much information quite yet on why exactly this hurricane was so bad. We won't ever really have enough since it was in pre-recorded history, unless we do discover time travel, which would be pretty cool. So here's the Hurricane of 1938 stats: 160 miles an hour, 940 hectopascals, once again a Category 5 hurricane. Tropical system threats, as you can see, high, high, and high, overall extreme. That's what we're looking at, and we can see this track here. Category 5 here around the Bahamas before it did hit New England is a Category 2. Quick story about this, only one forecaster out of the, I think 100 or 2 of forecasters there actually predicted it to hit New England. A lot of people said it was going to head out to sea. Most actually even forecasted a sunny day in the United States. There was no mention of a hurricane. Here's a surface map. This is the closest that we have to satellite imagery. Here's the low pressure system going up and down. You can see this very close area of those ISO lines. That is where the strongest winds were. Getting into impacts, very devastating storm, flooded a lot of areas, was just a bad storm in general. Here's the Galveston Hurricane of 1900. Why did we pick this? Once again, very deadly, very strong, and very costly. So here is its stats. What is the only Category 4 on our list? Here it is. Winds of 145 miles per hour and a pressure of 936 hectopascals, with the exception of one other Category 4. Tropical system threat. Well, it was mostly extreme here with high wind, high storm surge, and high rain threats. Here's the track. Tropical storm for most of its life before it did hit as a Category 4, as it did hit Galveston, Texas, before it did head out to sea. Here's a surface map. As you can see, very close ISO lines again indicating a strong hurricane. Here are the impacts that it did. Devastating. Once again, that's going to be a common trend with these hurricanes here. At number 6, we have the Bangladesh cyclone. Why this one? 138,000 were killed. A Category 5 cyclone, and it did over $1 billion in damage. So here it is, 160 miles an hour, 918 hectopascals. Once again, makes it a Category 5. And the tropical system threats, as you can see, all pretty extreme here. Probably some of the highest on this list. Getting into the track, it did actually peak right before landfall, unfortunately, which therefore did mean for Bangladesh they were going to get the worst of it. Satellite imagery, this shows a very well-defined eye, and you can even see a little bit of wind shear, which is probably why it didn't get even stronger than it already was. Impacts, once again, extremely devastating, and now we get into number 5. This one's probably a very familiar name to you, Hurricane Irma. Here it is. Why this hurricane? Impacted many regions intensely, winds up to 180 miles an hour, and it did over $64 billion in damages. The hurricane had 180-mile-an-hour winds and 914 hectopascals as its pressure, once again making it a Category 5 hurricane. Tropical system threats, winds was high, storm surge extreme, and rain once again high, making the overall tropical threat extreme. Here we go. As you can see, this was actually a storm that I covered intensely. Category 3, Category 2, Category 3. That was how we were seeing it for a while, and then it eventually strengthened to a Category 5 for a while. We can do a Category 4, strengthen back up to a Category 5 when it hit Cuba before going up the Florida coast. Here's some satellite imagery of the storm, very organized, very strong. This is Irma. Over here, this is actually Jose, and the Leeward Islands got impacted by both of these. Here's a satellite loop of Irma. As you can see, a very organized storm. You can actually see it actually did weaken slightly in this, because you can see the cloud tops weren't quite as strong, but you could see it wrapping back around. That obviously did show some danger. More satellite stuff. This was Irma as a Category 4 as it was about to strike Florida, which was covered in clouds. And then here's some radar imagery that also does show issues. Impacts, houses were flattened, places were flooded. It was not good. And here's the power outage stuff. As you can see, this is before Irma, this is after Irma. So, once again, not good news. Number 4, here's Hurricane Katrina. Why was this hurricane picked? It killed almost 2,000 people, completely flooded New Orleans, and did $125 billion in US dollar damage of 2005. It's very important that you remember these are $2005 and not the 2017 US dollar. So, hurricane stats, 75 miles an hour, 902 hectopascals, Category 5. Here it is, extreme threats, storm surge being by far the highest, and that is explained in the flooding. Here it is, Category 5 actually struck New Orleans as a Category 3, and you'll see the damage it did later. Here's some satellite images of this devastating hurricane, and as you can see, it was just very bad. Here's some radar of it going up to landfall. Here it is, many rain bands in with this storm. This was a very scary situation, and you can see here it is. This is it as it made landfall as I was beginning to collapse. Here's a picture of inside the eye. You can see going all the way around. This was obviously a 360 view, and you can even see here, there are the clouds of the eye itself. Here's some impacts, devastating damage, just unfortunate. And then here you can see quite a bit of rain, up to 15, 16, maybe even 20 inches in some spots. Number 3, Typhoon Haiyan, probably a typhoon you've never heard of, but you know what, we're going to talk about it anyway because it was devastating. This killed over 6,000 people, did extreme damage to the Philippines, and did over $4 billion in damage, was the strongest landfall of a hurricane that has ever been made. Hurricane stats, winds up to 195 miles per hour, and the only sub-800 millibar hurricane on this list, 895 hectopascals. That is, well, this Category 5. So, getting into tropical system threats, as you can see, rain, storm surge, not so bad, but wind was very bad, which makes this overall tropical storm threat extreme. You can see a long-lived Category 5 went straight through the heart of the Philippines before it did head up and hit China as a Category 1. Here's satellite of this incredibly powerful beast. Just terrible to watch. Here it is making landfall in the Philippines, and you can just tell how strong that hurricane is. Just truly how strong this must be in order to do the damage it was doing. Here's some radar imagery of it as it does approach the Philippines, and, well, it was once again devastating. You can see that core was falling apart after it did strike. Impacts were just devastating. The homes in the Philippines were just absolutely annihilated. It was sad. At number 2, we have Hurricane Maria. Hurricane Maria was one that killed up to 1,200 hurricanes, almost completely knocked out power in Puerto Rico, and did $91 billion in damage. 175 miles per hour was its top speed at 908 hectopascals, and here you are with that Category 5 status. Here you are, extreme wind, extreme storm surge, and an extreme tropical threat, but rain wasn't as much of one with this particular hurricane. Struck as a Category 4, but was a Category 5 just before it struck, and then it did go along the coast of the United States. That was a worry for a little while. Here's some satellite imagery of this storm, and here it is, the power outages. This is before Hurricane Maria, this is after Hurricane Maria. So as you can see, almost all of Puerto Rico's power was knocked out. Here are the impacts. A lot of homes flattened, unfortunately, and you can see the trend with these images that I said. And now, before we do get to number 1, let's get to some honorable mentions. Those being Hurricane Wilma, the strongest Atlantic hurricane in history, winds of 185 miles an hour, maybe 190, and this storm had 874, I think it was, hectopascals in barometric pressure, very strong, same year as Katrina, Rita, Dennis, Emily, those storms, so this was obviously a part of a very strong year. Hurricane Rita, once again, a part of the 2005 hurricane season, a Category 5 that struck Texas as a Category 4, once again an honorable mention. Typhoon Nancy, strongest typhoon of all time, 220 miles an hour was its wind speed. So that was an incredibly strong storm. Hurricane Patricia, 215 miles an hour, once again, devastating hurricane, and one that is an honorable mention. And finally, our final honorable mention only got up to a Category 3, Hurricane Sandy. This was a devastating storm, actually struck New York as a Category 1, storm surge being by far its worst threat. So now let's get into number 1. This was Hurricane Harvey of last year. So why this hurricane killed at least 100 people, the costliest hurricane of all times, did at least $125 billion in damage, which you're probably asking, well, that's the same as Katrina. But Katrina was back in 2005, meaning adjusted for inflation. Katrina should be more, right? Well, this $125 billion is the set cost that we know right now, but we do know it's a lot more. The estimates are still at around $200 billion. So, here we go with the hurricane stats. Winds only at 130 miles an hour, 937 hectopascals was its pressure, meaning it was only a Category 4 and barely one at that, almost a Category 3. So what made it do all of its damage? Well, that was due to the rain. Storm surge was still a threat, wind was still a threat, but the rain was just insane with this. Here we go with its track, and you can see just how long it meandered around this area. Each of those dots is 6 to 12 hours that it was there. So you can see just how crazy this hurricane slowed down and just did the damage it did. Here you go with satellite imagery. This was before it did become anything special. We actually expected it to die off shortly after this satellite image. Here it is just before landfall. That big eye right there, and you can even see the outflow that is coming from the system. Here's some near landfall shots. Here's a landfall shot. And here's a GIF of this entire hurricane's life. So here it is. This is when we thought it was going to die out. But as you can see, it didn't. It was a wave here. It was a tropical wave. So then it would gradually strengthen. Here it became a tropical depression. Then it would become a tropical storm. Category 1 by here. Category 2, I think, by here. Category 3 and Category 4. So there you go. And then it struck and it meandered over that area for a while. Every single one of these frames being maybe half a day or so. So you can see just how long this did meander around this area. Here you go, lots of rain, lots and lots of rain. You can see even a 60-inch contour there. And that just shows you how much there was. You can see 50 to 59 in some areas. Here we are, this is 40 to 44. In the light blue here, this is 20 to 24 inches. So you can see just how crazy the rain totals were around this area. Here are more rain total stuff. The maximum rain that we did see from this, obviously well over 60 inches. Just a ton of rain to have to deal with. Here are the impacts of the devastating flooding that this did. Alright, well, check me out on social media at Microcasting on Facebook and Twitter.